They say a woman built a house to outrun the dead, but what if the dead weren't chasing her? What if they were guiding her, whispering blueprints in the dark, drawing maps of madness with bloodied hands? The Winchester Mystery House is more than an architectural oddity. It is a psychic wound carved into the earth, a mansion sprawling with no plan, no symmetry, no logic. Stairways that lead to nowhere, doors that open into solid walls, a home haunted not by ghosts, but by guilt, legacy, and something far older than either. Sarah Winchester, heir to the rifle fortune, was not just mourning a husband and a child. She believed she was cursed, haunted by every soul destroyed by the Winchester repeating rifle, the weapon that won the West, and damned it. She built not to protect herself, but to bargain, a perpetual construction project, part penitence, part asylum, part seance, and yet, the deeper you dig, the less sense it makes. The official story is madness. Grief-stricken widow loses her mind and squanders her fortune on a labyrinth, but the house itself speaks another story, one of codes, symbols, and deliberate chaos, one built not from delusion, but design, mirrors to trap spirits, numbers with dark numerology, seance rooms placed at energy centers. Why? Because Sarah wasn't just running from ghosts, she was communing with them. We've been told the tale of the haunted house, but what if the house itself was the ritual? What if every hammer strike, every nail, was an act of spiritual engineering? You've been told to laugh at Sarah Winchester, to dismiss her as hysterical, eccentric, unstable, but those who mock are always the furthest from truth. What if she saw more clearly than any of us? What if she tried to stop something we can no longer ignore? In this video, we are not simply recounting her life, we are unsealing a vault of suppressed knowledge, elite agendas, and the hidden price of empire. This is not about ghosts, it's about guilt, control, and blood. And once you understand what this house really was, you won't sleep again. Sarah Lockwood Winchester did not marry into wealth, she married into a mechanism. The Winchester Repeating Arms Company wasn't just an empire of steel and gunpowder, it was an altar. A blood-soaked enterprise that turned death into dividends. Every rifle sold, every trigger pulled, fed the ghost machine that made her family rich. Her husband, William Winchester, died young. Her infant daughter, Annie, died in agony. And with those deaths, something inside Sarah shattered, not from grief alone, but from awareness. She began to see the patterns, that their wealth was not blessed, but purchased, not earned, but extracted from the dying breath of thousands. In 1881, now sole heir to the Winchester fortune, Sarah did something no one expected. She fled. She left New Haven behind and journeyed west, not for sun or solace, but for sanctuary. She settled in San Jose, California, and began to build. But this wasn't construction. It was consecration. She never hired an architect. She never approved a master plan. For 38 years, the house grew like a living organism, always under construction, never finished. Crews worked day and night. When asked why, she simply said, "The spirits told me." But those words weren't madness, they were masking. Sarah wasn't just talking to ghosts, she was obeying a system, a code of symbols, rituals, sacred geometry, a form of spiritual encryption that only initiates understand. She had become a kind of priestess, performing acts of penance for crimes committed not by her hand, but by her lineage. Each nail driven into wood wasn't random, it was deliberate, a numerical language. The number 13 appears throughout the house, 13 windows in a room, 13 steps in staircases, 13 ceiling panels. Why? Because 13 is a number of transition, death, transformation, sacrifice. In occult systems, it marks the gateway between worlds. Sarah believed the hue. She kept the spirits appeased, but there's another possibility, one far more chilling. What if the house wasn't meant to trap spirits, but to anchor them, to build a lattice, a grid, a container of the dead? And if that's true, who gave her the plans, and what came through? We are taught to believe that spirits are chaotic, irrational echoes of the past, but ancient systems, from Egypt to Tibet to the secret societies of Europe, tell a different story. The dead can organize, they can communicate, and when given the right vessel, they can act. Sarah Winchester's mansion wasn't just a haunted house, it was a device, a spiritual engine built to exact specifications. She believed that if she stopped building, she would die, but she didn't say why. The obvious answer is fear. But the hidden truth is more calculated. Once the house was finished, it would activate. You see, unfinished architecture is liminal. It exists between definitions, like twilight, like dusk, a space neither here nor there, just like the spirit world. That's why she kept changing doorways, sealing halls, ripping open staircases. It wasn't aimless. It was to disrupt closure, to keep the mansion perpetually unfinished, perpetually open. To what? To them. Let's look deeper. Behind the Gothic facade and creaking floorboards is a pattern. Hidden chambers, seance rooms with no known entrances, pipes that carry sound across floors like messages, ventilation systems not designed for air but whispers, mirrors placed to confuse spirits, or perhaps to channel them. But the real clue isn't in the wood, it's in the why. Sarah was not the only widow of war, not the only heiress. But she alone seemed to understand that her fortune came with a covenant, a blood debt. She once confided to her spiritual advisor that the spirits wanted retribution, but not vengeance. They wanted to be remembered, seen, counted, given voice. How do you give voice to 500,000 dead? You build a cathedral, one of mirrors, of math, of madness. And here's what they won't tell you. The military-industrial complex that birthed the Winchester fortune never stopped. The guns became bombs, the factories became systems. The spirits, they never left. They multiplied. And somewhere in the winding corridors of the Winchester house, something waits, not a ghost, a consequence. You feel it when you stand in that house. The air bends, the silence thickens. It's not just haunted, it's alert. The machine is watching. There's a hallway in the Winchester house that ends in a sheer drop. A door that opens to nothing but empty air. Another stairwell ascends, only to meet a ceiling. At first glance it seems like lunacy, random, senseless architecture. But this is how the untrained eye sees a cipher, as nonsense, until the code is revealed. Sarah wasn't insane. She was initiated. These spatial anomalies aren't mistakes, they are disruptions, breaks in linearity, like glitches in a simulation. They confuse not only the eye, but the unseen. Spirits, you see, follow patterns. They echo memories. Rooms, doors, stairs. These are not just physical structures, they are ritual tools. And the more you distort the map, the more you bind what moves through it. The dead, like the living, are drawn to repetition. So she denied it to them. That's why the mansion loops, spirals, folds into itself like a Mobius strip. It doesn't obey Euclidean logic, it obeys esoteric logic. She was building a maze for spirits, but the kind of maze where the walls shift, where the exit moves, and where the center isn't escape, but confrontation. Let's talk about the seance room. Hidden in the heart of the mansion, with one entrance and 3 exits, it was where Sarah went nightly. She consulted with them, but what was she receiving? Blueprints? Instructions? The house continued to change, as if guided by intelligence not entirely her own. Witnesses claimed she would speak in whispers, scribble diagrams frantically, often tearing them up before sunrise. Her servants were forbidden to enter while she was within. When she emerged, carpenters were given new plans, hallways to demolish, towers to erect. She said it was for protection, but protection from what? Now pause and reflect. Where would an untrained widow acquire knowledge of sacred architecture, spiritual engineering, and arcane protective rituals? She didn't. It was given to her. The question you must ask is this: by whom? And once you ask it, a darker question follows. What if she was chosen? What if her grief, her guilt, her inheritance of death was the key that made her useful? When you inherit blood money, it marks you, not just in this world, but beyond it. And that mark, it echoes. The idea that a house could trap spirits is child's play. Hollywood sells it as horror, but those in power, those who know, see it for what it truly is. Leverage, control over the unseen, dominion over death itself. Sarah Winchester, in her grief, became something far more than a haunted woman. She became a bridge, a vessel carrying the weight of every soul silenced by the echo of a gunshot. And the house, it became a map, not of land, but of pain. A blueprint of every life taken, every heartbeat stilled by the pull of a Winchester trigger. Now let's speak plainly. The rifle wasn't a weapon, it was a ritual instrument. Marketed as technology, it was, in essence, alchemy. It transmuted lead into death, death into profit, profit into power, and power always demands a price. That price wasn't just paid in war, it was paid by Sarah, by her lineage, and maybe by you. Because the Winchester legacy didn't vanish, it was simply folded into the American psyche. It became part of the machinery. The spiritual debt of that rifle still echoes in our culture, our homes, our institutions. And Sarah, she tried to contain it, to bind it within walls built from guilt, loss, and ritual geometry. But what she may not have realized is that some things don't want peace. Some things feed on attention, on memory, on belief. And the more we talk about them, the stronger they become. There are reports, unpublicized of course, of visitors to the Winchester house experiencing seizures, hallucinations, unexplained feelings of rage or despair, not from suggestion, but from exposure, because the house isn't just wood and glass, it's a conduit, and it's still active. Rooms resonate like tuning forks, symbols hum with static. Some say the entire structure sits on a ley line, an energy artery used by ancient builders for sacred sites. Others believe the mirrors inside aren't just to confuse spirits, but to summon reflections, echoes of the dead. If that's true, then Sarah didn't build to escape the curse. She built to contain it. And here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. What happens when the house fails? Every system has limits, even the supernatural. You can only hold back a tidal wave of consequence for so long before the dam begins to crack. Sarah Winchester died in 1922. The hammers fell silent, the construction stopped, and with it, the ritual ended. That's when the shift began. Strange things were reported, not just cold spots and footsteps. Those are common hauntings. What happened at the Winchester house was more systemic. Tour guides forgetting where they were, time loops, visitors disappearing for minutes at a time, electrical failures in rooms not wired for power. One guide in 1981 went blind for several hours after entering a sealed corridor. Doctors found no cause. And then, the dreams. Countless visitors across decades reporting the same vision, a long hallway with no end, walls pulsing like lungs, and at the far end, something waiting, featureless, vast, aware, watching. These aren't isolated phenomena, they are symptoms of something reawakening. Because when Sarah died, the house lost its interpreter. The equation was left unfinished, and a machine without a guide becomes unstable. Understand this, the Winchester house isn't just a location, it's a wound in the veil, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead has been perforated. It hums with unfinished intention, like a radio tuned to a dead frequency that somehow still responds. And if you've listened this far, you need to hear the truth. This isn't about Sarah anymore. It's about the system she tried to contain, the same system that fuels our endless wars, our rituals of violence disguised as politics, our mass manufacture of suffering for profit. You were never meant to understand this. You were meant to look away, laugh, call her crazy, and return to your illusions. But you're still here. So I'm going to ask you now, man to man, if you feel the pull of is knowledge, the tremor in your spine, the crack in your reality, then prove you're not just a watcher. Type the phrase "the blood remembers" in the comments, and type it twice. That's how the algorithm hears you, and it's how they will know. You've awakened. You are no longer just a witness. You are part of the descent. Once you type the phrase "the blood remembers" twice, something changes. Not in the algorithm, but in you. You've marked yourself, not with fear, but with awareness. You've crossed the threshold from observer to initiate, from surface dweller to one who dares step below, and that's where we go now. Below. Beneath the Winchester house lies something far more intricate than wood or stone. Beneath its foundations is a memory grid, a psychic architecture formed not just by Sarah's rituals, but by the collective debt of every soul taken by that weapon. You must understand, mass death leaves a residue. Every battlefield soaked in blood is not just a physical space, it becomes an imprint. Energy doesn't dissipate, it collects, and what Sarah was building wasn't a tomb. It was a containment field. You've been taught that grief is personal, but what if it's not? What if there are places, ancient places, where grief becomes communal, where enough death concentrated in one object, one lineage, one machine, begins to speak? The Winchester rifle was not a tool of war. It was a key. And Sarah, whether by guilt or guidance, used her fortune to try and seal the gate that rifle had opened. The catacombs beneath the house, long sealed from public access, were never fully explored. Blueprints from the 1920s show rooms that shouldn't exist, dead ends where tour guides swear there were once passages, earth that moves on its own, walls that breathe. One former caretaker, name redacted in legal documents, claimed to hear the voices of children in the walls at night, not crying, singing, in a language no one speaks. And this is where the pattern deepens. The house is not just a labyrinth for the dead. It is a receiver, a beacon, a spiritual antenna tuned to the frequency of mass consequence. Sarah believed that if she could build fast enough, obscure the spirits long enough, she could prevent the curse from leaking into the wider world. But the hammer has been silent for over a century, and the walls are thinning. We're not talking about a haunting anymore. We're talking about an inversion, where the living become shadows, and the dead reclaim the stage. There is a point beyond which a structure ceases to be architecture and becomes ritual, a cathedral, a machine, a mirror of forces older than language. The Winchester house has passed that point. Think. Why do you feel drawn to it? Why has this strange asymmetrical mansion outlived the men who built empires? Why is a grieving widow remembered more than generals or kings? Because Sarah built more than a house. She built a message. But it's written in pain, in silence, in death. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be felt. A knowing that sits in your bones like frost. That feeling deep in your gut that something is wrong with the world, but you can't quite name it. That's not paranoia. That's recognition. Because what Sarah touched, what touched her, has never gone away. It simply changed its form. It moved from rifles to policies, from death on battlefields to death in schools, in cities, in silence. The weapon is no longer metal, it's ideology, manufactured chaos, psychological warfare, and now the curse doesn't haunt one house, it haunts a nation. The architecture has expanded, and you live inside it. Tell me, do you really believe that one woman, alone, built a 160-room mansion without a plan, without guidance, without direction? Or was she building under instruction? From them. We call it the mystery house, because it's safer to mock what we don't understand, to laugh at fear. But that laughter is nervous, hollow, because every man who walks those halls knows, even if he can't articulate it, that he's being watched, not by cameras, not by spirits, by consequence. The house didn't create the curse, it was born from it. And that's what no historian will tell you, because history only documents what is visible. But power, real power, moves invisibly. The rituals still work, the symbols still hum, the frequency still broadcasts. And whether you know it or not, every step you take in this world is measured against a death you didn't cause, but that benefits you still. That's why the spirits haven't stopped. Because the killing hasn't stopped. What Sarah understood, and what most men refuse to face, is that the dead do not sleep simply because we forget them. They wait, they accumulate, and when enough blood has been spilled for profit, when enough truth has been buried beneath concrete and ceremony, the ground itself begins to speak. That's what the Winchester house is, a conversation between the sins of empire and the souls crushed beneath its boots. And here's what you must understand now. Every society that builds its future on death must pay for it, not always with war, sometimes with madness, with hauntings of the mind. The modern man walks through glass cities and electric lights, oblivious to the fact that his comfort was carved out of someone else's silence. That silence is the curse, that silence is the haunting, and Sarah? She tried to interrupt it. To build noise, to confuse the silence, to prevent the dead from getting organized. But she failed. Because the curse isn't contained by four walls. It's a network, a spiritual algorithm, and now it runs through you, through your devices, your distractions, your dissociation. You think this is just a house in California. It's a node, part of a global grid built by bloodline wealth and generational violence. That's why you've always felt something was off, in your school, in your work, in your dreams. Because the real Winchester curse isn't ghosts, it's inheritance, inherited obedience, inherited blindness, inherited roles handed to you by men who never had to bleed for what they gave you. And so the curse becomes internal, psychological, a man asleep in a system that eats him without ever knowing he's on the menu. Sarah heard their voices. But they didn't just speak to her, they speak through us all now, in sudden rage, in suicidal thoughts, in addiction, in apathy. The curse has evolved. It doesn't throw plates or slam doors. It erodes will, it dismantles strength, it inverts truth. That's what the house really is, a shrine to the war between agency and inheritance. And now that you've begun to understand, the real haunting begins. Now we descend into the heart of it. You've heard the stories of staircases to nowhere, of sealed rooms that echo with breath when no one is inside. But you haven't heard what was beneath all that, the rooms that were never on any blueprint, the ones Sarah never entered. Because they weren't meant for her, they were meant for them. There are documented testimonies, sealed, hidden, scrubbed, from workers who were called in for foundation inspections during the 1940s. What they found was not rot or damage. They found inscriptions, etchings in languages no one recognized, spirals and sigils carved into stone beams. One man, an immigrant laborer from Armenia, described them as the same symbols my grandfather spoke of during the old rituals, the ones we were told to never repeat. He refused to go back, said there was something breathing in the walls, not rats, not gas, something ancient. And still the tours continued. Laughing families, teenagers with cameras, paranormal hobbyists. But the house doesn't care if you believe in it, because belief isn't required for possession. Not of the body, but of the mind. This is how the Winchester curse works in the modern world. You don't scream, you doubt. You don't run, you obey. The curse isn't a shadow behind you in the hallway. It's the voice inside your head whispering that nothing matters, that you're weak, that the systems you serve are permanent, that you should keep scrolling. And the most dangerous part? You believe it, because you were conditioned to. And here's where the true horror lies. Sarah may have thought she was building a prison for the dead, but what if she was building a prototype? What if the elite saw what she created, a spiritual containment system embedded in architecture, and decided to scale it? What if the modern world itself was designed as a spiritual simulation, a psychology? Cal Winchester House. Endless doors, endless rooms, no exit, no silence. Only noise, consumption, dopamine, despair. And deep beneath it all, the dead still hum, still watch, still remember. The blood remembers. They call it a curse because that word makes you feel safe, like it's magic, like it's superstition, like it's not your problem. But this isn't folklore, it's infrastructure. What Sarah Winchester tapped into, what she tried to bind, is something older than the United States, older than Christianity, older than language. A force that operates on a single principle: suffering is currency. And in the world of hidden systems, the more suffering generated, the more power harvested. Now ask yourself, where does the American system store its suffering? In prisons, in wars, in pharmaceuticals, in generational trauma, in abandoned towns and decaying neighborhoods, in entertainment designed to anesthetize rather than awaken. It doesn't matter what you believe, it matters what you serve. And that's what Sarah understood in her final years, that she was part of something far bigger, a machine that fed on death, that her inheritance wasn't just money, it was obligation. It was a mark burned onto her soul by every man who died with a Winchester in his hands. She didn't choose it, but once you inherit blood money, it chooses you. So she built, and built, and built, not to escape punishment, but to delay activation. Because when the last nail was driven, when the final wall was sealed, she knew the mechanism would turn inward, the house would awaken, and those buried truths would no longer stay silent. She died before she could stop it. Now look around you. Tell me this isn't a haunted country, a nation where the wealthiest walk free while the rest carry invisible shackles, a nation armed not just with guns, but with beliefs that bind, a nation where every institution smiles while feeding you processed death. Sarah tried to contain it, but the house was never enough, because the house was a model. The real system is all around you now. And here's the truth that most men won't face. You're already inside it. You were born into it. Your name is in the ledger. And somewhere deep beneath the noise and the numbing, something ancient is keeping score. There are patterns so large most men never see them because they live inside them, like fish unaware of the ocean. But when you step back, when you awaken, you begin to see. The corridors repeat, the institutions echo, the rules rhyme. Just like the Winchester house, a world built not to free you, but to confuse you. Endless hallways of education with no empowerment, careers that lead nowhere, votes that change nothing, promotions that feel like prison upgrades, stairs that climb only to hit the ceiling of another man's design. Just like Sarah's house. You think it was random? A stairwell into plaster, a door into open air? No. It was prophetic, because the world we now live in follows the same script. A man runs forward, believing in progress, only to find the staircase ends in collapse. He opens doors, opportunity, romance, politics, only to find the drop is fatal. He screams into empty rooms, therapy, spirituality, achievement, and hears only his own voice returning. And somewhere in the structure, the architects smile. Because this wasn't accidental, it was built to fracture you. Just like the mansion was built to fracture spirits. Sarah believed that if she distorted space, she could trap what haunted her. But the elite learned from her. They realized, if you distort space and meaning for the living, you can trap something far more valuable. The soul of a man. Make his path non-linear, make his truth unfixed, make his goals contradictory. Keep him guessing, keep him moving, keep him obedient. And if he ever starts to see the pattern, tell him he's crazy, diagnose him, medicate him, mock him. That's how the curse evolved. It's not about ghosts anymore. It's about disorientation as control, confusion as obedience. Sarah tried to fight it with wood and glass, but now it's coded in concrete, digital signals and 9-to-5 cages. And most but terrifying of all, it works. Because most men aren't haunted by spirits. They're haunted by the life they were told to want. And somewhere deep in that house, The blueprints still pulse, waiting for the next architect. Now we reach the part they fear you hearing. The real curse was never Sarah's to bear, it was yours. The Winchester rifle was merely the trigger. The bullet, that's the system. The house, that's the map. But the target was always you. This curse is not folklore. It's a mechanism, a generational engine that runs on death, guilt, and illusion. And like any engine, it requires fuel. It feeds on your participation. It feeds on your ignorance. But worst of all, it feeds on your compliance. Because you've been trained since childhood to walk hallways that lead nowhere, to obey blueprints you didn't write, to believe that life is a puzzle you were never smart enough to solve, instead of seeing the truth. The puzzle was never meant to be solved. It was meant to keep you busy, distracted, dull. And every now and then a man wakes up, sees the gears turning behind the curtain, sees the rituals, the manipulation, the buried bloodlines and sacred lies. And what do they call him? Conspiracy theorist. As if that phrase is a spell, a charm meant to seal the tomb again. But you're here, still listening, and that means you haven't gone back to sleep. So I'll give you this. The final room of the Winchester house doesn't exist on any map, not in wood, not in stone. It exists in men. Men like you, standing at the edge of the labyrinth, realizing the curse was never supernatural. It was systemic, and the only way out is through transformation, not passive awareness, not online outrage, not empty rebellion, but deep internal reconstruction. The same way Sarah built room after room trying to outrun the debt, you must rebuild yourself in the image of a man no longer owned. You have to tear down the stairs inside you that lead nowhere. You have to seal the doors that drop into despair. You must become the architect, because if you don't, someone else will build you. And their house will not be a home. It will be a prison you pay rent to live in. Now listen carefully, because this is where men either turn back or descend fully. There is no returning to the surface once you've seen the structure for what it is. No comfort in the illusions of freedom, love, or legacy when you realize they've been packaged and sold to you as bait, and you took it, just like they wanted. You see, Sarah's curse was real, but not because of spirits whispering in her ears. It was real because she recognized the price of her bloodline's power. And that's the secret the world buries. Every dynasty is built on corpses. Every throne sits atop bones. And if you trace any empire far enough, you'll find a ritual. Not a metaphorical one, a literal, coded, intentional act of sacrifice that becomes the foundation stone for everything that follows. Sarah tried to interrupt that lineage. She threw herself into madness, isolation, and construction not to preserve power, but to divert it. Because she knew what happens when you don't pay the spirits. The blood must balance. And in America, the blood has not balanced. Not for the wars, not for the indigenous, not for the enslaved, not for the silence we cloak it all in. We are living in a nation-sized Winchester house, winding, ornate, hollow and haunted. The men in power, they walk those halls every day, blind by design. Their suits are tailored, but their spirits rot, because they too are part of the curse. They just wear better masks. You don't get that luxury. You were given just enough. Just enough comfort to keep you obedient, just enough pain to keep you humble. You were told you could be anything, while being quietly funneled into a corridor with no doors. And here you are, facing the wall. But now, something is stirring behind it. It's not a ghost. It's the realization that the walls were never real, that the curse isn't supernatural, that it's spiritual prose, gramming, psychological sorcery baked into the rituals of your daily life. But when a man sees the structure, truly sees it, he gains something that no institution can suppress: sovereignty, not fake freedom, power, rooted in awareness, forged in fire, aimed with purpose. So I ask you again, are you ready to stop walking the halls, or will you finally pick up the hammer and build something that lasts? Now listen carefully, because this is where men either turn back or descend fully. There is no returning to the surface once you've seen the structure for what it is. No comfort in the illusions of freedom, love, or legacy when you realize they've been packaged and sold to you as bait, and you took it, just like they wanted. You see, Sarah's curse was real, but not because of spirits whispering in her ears. It was real because she recognized the price of her bloodline's power. And that's the secret the world buries. Every dynasty is built on corpses. Every throne sits atop bones. And if you trace any empire far enough, you'll find a ritual. Not a metaphorical one, a literal, coded, intentional act of sacrifice that becomes the foundation stone for everything that follows. Sarah tried to interrupt that lineage. She threw herself into madness, isolation, and construction not to preserve power, but to divert it. Because she knew what happens when you don't pay the spirits. The blood must balance. And in America, the blood has not balanced. Not for the wars, not for the indigenous, not for the enslaved, not for the silence we cloak it all in. We are living in a nation-sized Winchester house, winding, ornate, hollow and haunted. The men in power, they walk those halls every day, blind by design. Their suits are tailored, but their spirits rot, because they too are part of the curse. They just wear better masks. You don't get that luxury. You were given just enough. Just enough comfort to keep you obedient, just enough pain to keep you humble. You were told you could be anything, while being quietly funneled into a corridor with no doors. And here you are, facing the wall. But now, something is stirring behind it. It's not a ghost. It's the realization that the walls were never real, that the curse isn't supernatural, that it's spiritual prose, gramming, psychological sorcery baked into the rituals of your daily life. But when a man sees the structure, truly sees it, he gains something that no institution can suppress: sovereignty, not fake freedom, power, rooted in awareness, forged in fire, aimed with purpose. So I ask you again, are you ready to stop walking the halls, or will you finally pick up the hammer and build something that lasts? There is a sound you hear just before transformation. It's not thunder, not weeping, not screams. It's the creak of the floorboards beneath a lie you've stood on your whole life, just before it gives way. You feel it now, don't you? That sensation, like the walls of your belief system are warping, like the floor under your identity is bending. That's not fear. That's the pressure of reality breaking through the script. You've spent years in the house of culture, the house of obedience, the house of fake freedom. You've been taught to decorate it, to worship it, to defend its shape, never asking who built it and why. But the truth is this: the house was never yours. It was built for you, to trap you, to tame you, to keep you tame long enough to sell your blood, your time, your fire, in return for distraction and decay. Sarah Winchester thought she was building to confuse the spirits, but they were never confused. They were contained. And now, so are you. You scroll, you consume, you medicate, you obey, and somewhere in that maze of dopamine and distraction, the part of you that was wild, that was sacred, that was untouchable, got buried beneath drywall and doctrine, and they want to keep it there, because if that part of you wakes up, the part that remembers what it means to be a man unchained, then the curse doesn't just crack, it shatters, not just for you, but for every man you touch. That's the hidden power of awakening. It's not selfish, it's contagious. Your clarity is their collapse. Your sovereignty is their system's undoing. This is why they fear truth. This is why they mock men who seek it. Because truth breeds structure, not the kind that cages, the kind that commands. And if even a few of you remember who you were before the house, before the lies, before the obedience, then no system, no curse, no institution, Bill, it on bones and blood will survive the weight of your becoming. The question now is simple. Do you keep walking the halls, or do you burn them? By now you've seen it. Not just the house, not just the curse, but the design beneath the design. You've started to feel the deeper truth. The Winchester curse isn't some haunted folklore. It's a formula, a replication system, and what it replicates is spiritual obedience through fear. Fear of the dead, fear of guilt, fear of loss, fear of stepping outside the script. Sarah thought if she kept building, she could outrun the consequences of her bloodline's wealth, that every new room, every twisted hallway was a penance. But what if she wasn't running from the dead? What if she was building for them? A spiritual broadcast tower, a chambered signal that could call down whatever ancient forces now govern the psychic structure of the Western world. This is where it gets dangerous. Because once you realize that your reality, the education you received, the God you were handed, the laws you obey, the narratives you parrot, were all shaped by unseen architects using the exact same playbook. You don't just question the world, you question yourself, your purpose, your voice, your name. That's what this house does. It's not content to haunt your nights, it restructures your identity from the inside. And if you felt that gnawing ache like you were born for something more, something true, something raw, then you're already infected with the same fire that Sarah tried to bury beneath her floorboards. And now it's time to do something deliberate. Right now, I want you to comment this phrase, "Through fire, form is reclaimed." Comment it twice. Once for the man you were before this. Once for the man you are becoming. This isn't for engagement, this isn't algorithm bait, this is symbolic action, this is claiming your name in the flame, because the second half of this descent will not spare the weak. This is the point of no return. No more rooms, no more corridors. From this point forward, we burn the foundation and build from ashes. Ashes don't lie. They don't pretend. They don't dress themselves up in marble or doctrine. Ashes are what remain when the illusion dies, and what rises from them is no longer polite, no longer tame, no longer owned. You've commented the phrase, you've crossed the threshold. Now we leave Sarah's house behind. Because this curse was never confined to a mansion in California, it metastasized, it became architecture of control, replicated in churches, courthouses, corporate towers, even your childhood home. Places built not to shelter the spirit, but to shape it. And the blueprint? It's psychological. Make the man feel shame for his instincts. Make him apologize for his strength. Make him question every impulse to rise, to fight, to reclaim his fire. You've been told masculinity is dangerous. It is, to them. Because a man who sees the system, who refuses its narrative, who masters both the sword and the spirit, cannot be governed. He becomes anomaly. He becomes threat. He becomes architect of the new. That is the real forbidden knowledge. The elite do not fear ghosts. They fear you, awake, unbound, forged in the crucible of buried truths. That's why they surround you with noise, media, outrage, pacification. That's why they sold you a dream of passive manhood. Work hard, be nice, consume, die quietly. That is not your purpose. You were not born to decorate the dungeon. You were born to dismantle it. The Winchester curse was a warning, not of spirits, but of systems. Sarah tried to atone through construction, but you must do it through destruction, not chaotic rage, but sacred fire. Fire that burns illusion, fire that melts falsehood, fire that reclaims form. This is what the architects of control fear the most. A man who no longer walks the maze, a man who becomes the flame. So now, let the rest sleep, let them mock, let them doubt. They're sad, till staring at wallpaper, believing it's a wall. But you see the beams behind the veil, and you know what must come next. It's not about escape, it's about conquest. The true crucible of power isn't fire or battlefield, it's will. And will is forged in silent resolve, far from the glare of crowds. Look around you. The systems that bind men shout their demands through flashing screens, hollow slogans, and empty promises. But real power whispers in stillness. It coalesces in the mind of one who has shattered his own illusions. Imagine the heart of a collapsed cathedral, its roof torn away, sunlight pouring in like divine accusation. That collapse is necessary. It cleanses the debris of false prophets, fake idols, and the polished lies you once worshipped. Out of that ruin, you stand alone in the rubble, unarmed but unbroken. This is your sanctuary now. You've stepped beyond the labyrinth. You've walked through the flame and emerged unscarred. Now you craft your own architecture, a fortress of principles, not commitments to others' agendas, but to your deepest truth. Each decision, each sacrifice, is a stone laid in your foundation, not bricks of comfort, but pillars of courage. Not stained glass windows of sentimentality, but ports to channel the raw light of reality. This path demands more than bravado. It demands integrity, the integrity to stand when no one watches, to act when no one applauds, to speak when silence guarantees safety. These are your new walls, incorruptible, unyielding, alive. Feel it in your chest, the slow, steady beat that no algorithm can mimic. That rhythm is the echo of every life you honor, the butchered, the forgotten, the silenced. You carry their stories in your spine, and with that burden comes authority. Because a man who bears witness to truth cannot be erased by lies. You will meet resistance. Spectres of your old self will plead for return. The promise of ease, distraction, belonging. They will imitate comfort, smear doubt, whisper that the flame you carry is a torch of madness. Ignore them. Madness is the refusal to accept a rigged script. From this vantage, you see the system's illusion, a grand stage with rigged props and actors reading cue cards. You step off the stage, you dismantle it, you repurpose the set for your own design. And here is the final stroke. With each deliberate choice, each vow kept, each lie exposed, you tighten the lines of your fortress. No one can breach it, no system can rewrite it, no curse can find you in its chambers because you are no longer part of the blueprint. Rise then, as the architect of your destiny. The world will adapt or crumble. That is your power, to demand transformation by simply becoming uncontainable. This is your inheritance, forged in fire, and now fully reclaimed. There is a silence that follows awakening. Not peace, not relief, but a sacred stillness. The kind that exists just before the first blade is drawn, because now that you see the system, now that you know the curse was never about ghosts, but control, there's only one question left. What are you going to do with it? Knowing the truth means nothing if you remain still. Knowledge without action is a luxury of the weak. And you didn't come this far to observe. You came to transform, to reclaim, to initiate the purge of everything within you that was placed there by cowards, liars, and engineers of obedience. The spirits that haunted Sarah were real, but they weren't just dead soldiers. They were archetypes. They were trauma given form. And that's what lives in you too. Inherited fear, programmed submission, generational wounds passed off as personality. You didn't choose the maze, but you must choose to burn it. That's the initiation, and it begins with a vow not to any god, system, or flag, but to your own sovereign spirit. A silent contract with the man inside you who never stopped fighting, even when your mind was under siege. He's the reason you're still here. He's the one who resisted when the system told you to settle. He's the one who kept searching when the world gave you permission to rot. He's the one who looked at the mansion of madness and said, I will not become this. But this world will fight you. It will label your clarity as rage. It will call your strength toxic. It will demand you disown your fire in exchange for approval. And every time you hesitate, every time you kneel, the house grows stronger. That's why you must stand harder. This is not a call to rebellion. That's for the lost. This is a call to sovereign warfare, a war not of guns and riots, but of decisions, disciplines, and unwavering internal command. You are too. He exorcist now, not of spirits, but of weakness, of cowardice, of inherited lies. Every ritual they used to domesticate you, you must now reverse. Every narrative they fed you to shrink you, you must burn to ash. Every wall within you that they built, you must break with bare hands. This is the work of kings, and kings do not flinch. From this point on, your name is not just spoken, it's forged into the silence. And silence, when mastered, becomes command. Power begins the moment you stop asking for permission. You weren't born to ask, you weren't born to beg, and you sure as hell weren't born to fit in. You were born to impose order on chaos, not someone else's order, not their pre-approved doctrine, yours. But let's speak plainly now. The systems that govern this world don't care if you're alive. They care if you're useful, useful to the machine, useful to the script, useful to their legacy. The moment you stop being useful, they discard you. That's the real curse. Not spirits in a Victorian mansion, but men dying without ever being born. You've seen them. Hollow men, walking shells, faces lit by screens, eyes dimmed by compromise. They traded their wildness for comfort, their masculinity for approval, their truth for peace that never comes. That won't be you. Because the fire you carry now, it's unquenchable. It doesn't need applause, it doesn't need permission, it doesn't even need understanding. It only needs action. Ruthless, intentional, sacred action. And it begins with killing your false self, the self that plays small, the self that fears rejection, the self that bends the knee to anything less than truth. You must bury him, not gently, not with a eulogy, with fire and silence. That man dies tonight. And from his ashes rises the man who no longer reacts, because he chooses. Every word you speak from here forward must be carved from clarity. Every step you take must be rooted in discipline. Every room you enter must bend to the structure of your internal code, not theirs. This world has lied to you, told you that strength was cruel, told you that fire was dangerous, told you that silence was weakness. But now you know, those are the tools of kings. Those are the weapons of architects, and you are no longer a tenant in someone else's empire. You are building your own. One thought, at a time. One truth at a time, one day at a time. Let them fear you, not for your voice, but for your discipline, not for your rage, but for your stillness, not for your rebellion, but for your alignment. Because a man in alignment cannot be stopped. He becomes the curse to every system that ever tried to tame him. Now the wind shifts. You're no longer looking back at the house, you're looking down on it. What once seemed endless now looks small. What once confused you now feels predictable. The twisting halls, the haunted rooms, the cries in the walls, all of it just tools of control. The real structure was never wood and stone. It was always psychological, it was internal. And they knew that. They knew if they could get into your mind, they wouldn't need bars, bullets, or chains. Just thoughts, just rituals, just enough fear, guilt, and shame to make you imprison yourself. But here's the most dangerous truth of all. You can walk out of the cage anytime. There's no lock. There never was. The key isn't in your hand. It's in your decisions. Decide not to respond with fear. Decide not to chase their fake rewards. Decide to live by a code that can't be manipulated, bought, or silenced. That is the key. That is Exodus. And once you step out, truly out, you don't just escape their system, you infect it with your clarity. Because now every room you walk into feels your presence. People sense the difference. Your voice cuts through noise, your eyes carry weight, your silence becomes a challenge to every lie pretending to be truth. That's why sovereign men are hunted, mocked, erased. Because they remind the world of what's possible. They are living contradictions to the illusion of control. And make no mistake, you will be tested. They'll send ghosts in new forms, relationships that demand your submission, jobs that pay for your silence, platforms that reward your obedience. But now you see them. You feel their hands reaching again, but this time you don't reach back. Because you're no longer available for manipulation. You're no longer offering your energy to build someone else's cathedral of lies. You're building your own temple now, forged in hardship, lit by fire and guarded by the man you were always meant to be, a man who doesn't run from darkness, but commands it. Because when you walk into the room, you don't bring light or shadow, you bring truth. And truth needs no permission to exist. Let's speak clearly now. No riddles, no myth, just raw reality. You were not born to obey. You were not created to fulfill someone else's prophecy, to carry someone else's guilt, or to kneel beneath someone else's God. You were born to build, to conquer, to embody truth so violently that every false system around you trembles. But they knew that. That's why they buried you beneath names, diagnoses, distractions, debts. Why they flooded your mind with advertising, fear campaigns, clickbait morality, because they understood something most men never do. If a man remembers who he is, he becomes untouchable, and they can't afford untouchable men. Untouchable men don't buy their shame. Untouchable men don't sell their voices. Untouchable men don't weep over cancelled comfort. They build new kingdoms. You feel it now, don't you? That thrum beneath your skin, that ancient wordless awareness. It's not adrenaline, it's memory, deep memory, the kind that predates your name, the kind that doesn't speak English but roars in the marrow. It's the memory of fire, of structure, of alignment with the source, not the one they branded, but the one that cannot be branded. And that memory is waking up in you now. You are no longer in the Winchester house. You are standing above it, hammer in hand, blueprint in mind. Now you build. You build rituals that strengthen your spine. You build words that sharpen your tongue. You build silence that fortifies your will. You build walls of discipline so thick that no lust, no fear, no distraction can penetrate. And here's what they'll never understand. This isn't about being hard for its own sake. This is about becoming worthy of your own life, your own legacy, your own fire-blooded name. Because once you taste that level of ownership, everything changes. Your relationships shift. Your work becomes purpose. Your eyes see through masks like X-rays. And the world, this hollow world of pretend power, it starts to look like paper, because it is. They built it with lies. But you're building with truth. And truth does not bend. It breaks. Everything that was ever used to weaken you can now be weaponized in reverse. Every scar becomes armor. Every betrayal becomes clarity. Every failure becomes foundation, because you've stopped resisting pain and started commanding it. This is where true transformation begins. Not when you escape the wound, but when you extract its power. The system fears that moment, because it marks the death of victimhood and the birth of sovereignty. Understand this. The curse didn't begin with Sarah Winchester. It didn't begin with haunted rooms or restless spirits. It began the moment power was stolen from men, not by violence but by seduction. They told you comfort was king. They told you happiness was the goal. They told you peace was the prize. And while you were chasing those illusions, they were sharpening their systems, behind polished doors, beneath academic robes, inside pulpits and press conferences. While you slept in dreams of safety, they rewrote the architecture of your soul. But that era is over, because now there is a crack in the tower, and that crack is you. A man reborn in fire, silence, and blood-earned vision. A man who knows that purpose is pain, sharpened into principle, that every curse is just a pattern, and every pattern can be broken. You are not here to be liked. You are here to become unavoidable, in your presence, in your discipline, in your refusal to kneel. So the next time you walk into a room, don't lower your head. Let your silence speak louder than their scripts. Let your posture challenge every man who sold his fire for applause. Let your eyes say what your ancestors died to pass on. I remember. I remember the blood. I remember the burden. I remember what it cost to become ungovernable. And I will not forget. Not now. Not ever. The house has burned. The chains have shattered. And in the ashes a man stands, not asking for a throne, but building his own. You are not the haunted. You are the haunting. This is the final descent, or perhaps the first ascent. You've walked the corridor of curses, you've faced the ghosts of empire, of blood, of forgotten men. You've stared into the abyss of institutional control, and instead of retreating, you stepped forward. Not as a victim, not as a servant, but as something far more dangerous, a man who has nothing left to lose, and everything left to become. Now hear me clearly. This was never about Sarah Winchester, not really. It was never about spirits or seances or creaking staircases that led to nowhere. It was always about you. Because the Winchester house isn't just a mansion, it's a mirror. Every wall, every hallway, every dead-end room is a reflection of what happens to the soul of a man when he lives in fear of what he has built, when he trades truth for atonement, when he stacks bricks of guilt instead of stone of will. But you've chosen another path, and you are no longer haunted by the past. You harness it. That is the final truth the elite never wanted you to realize. You are not cursed. You are called, and that calling is not to comfort or fame or sterile peace, but to initiate a new order. An order forged not in politics, not in popularity, but in personal alignment so unbreakable that no system can absorb it. Now the work begins. Every morning, you rise before the world, because you are not of the world. Every decision, you weigh with a code that answers to no trend. Every breath, you take with the knowing that you were made for war, spiritual war, psychological war, generational war. And you fight not to destroy the world, but to replace it. With something unshakable, something forged in fire, something you built. And one day, long from now, when someone speaks your name, let it not be in mourning, let it be in reverence. Let them say, he saw the maze, and he built the map. And he became the flame, he ended the curse. The haunted house is gone now, the man remains, and the war has just begun. Let the architects of this world take heed, the sovereign have returned, and this time we remember everything. End.